anticipation, like you just couldn't wait. There was this sense of what's Santa gonna bring? Was I gonna get what I wanted? Am I gonna get anything? Am I gonna get a lump of coal this year? Those kinds of things. You look forward to seeing some of your family and hanging out with them, but you're thinking about all the cool things that are gonna happen, and you watch the Christmas movies and all this kind of stuff. And there's always this time of anticipation, just sitting there wondering, what's it gonna be like? What's going to happen? And I think that's actually the right feeling leading up to Christmas, okay? Because it really describes what it was like for the Jewish people leading up to the first Christmas. They were dealing with this same sense of wonder and wondering and anticipation about what could possibly happen and how things were going to go. And so that's what we see as we look into the prophecies that we've been talking about in the Old Testament. So have you ever wondered, what were the Jewish people expecting when the Messiah came? How could they know that something was going to happen? And what we see is again and again in the Old Testament, the Bible talks about this idea of a kingdom coming, of a king coming, of a Messiah coming, of someone coming to fix stuff. Okay, and so there was this, by the time we get to the time of Jesus, there is this sense of anticipation that has been building for literally thousands of years of the Messiah coming. What is the Messiah going to be like? And for 100 years on either side of the birth of Jesus, all these people popped up claiming to be the Messiah. And inevitably they would get a big following, and they would start reaching people, and some of them would be threatening insurrection because they thought it was a political Messiah, and so the Roman government would put him down. They'd crucify the guy, and he'd never be heard from again. And this happened from 100 years before Jesus to 100 years after. There was something a little different about Jesus. What was that? The rest of them got crucified and we never heard from him again.
He rose again.
He rose from the grave, okay? So that's the big difference between those. And so this morning, as we continue this series on the Old Testament prophecies that point to the birth of Jesus, again, we're going to be in Isaiah chapter 9. And Isaiah 9 is one of the most important passages in the Bible when it comes to predicting the Messiah and talking about who the Messiah is. And so it's so important that for the next 2 weeks, we're going to look at this prophecy of Isaiah and see what he's saying about the birth and the role of the Messiah. What is the Messiah going to do? This chapter is one of the main reasons that the Jewish people were anticipating the coming of the Messiah. One of the main reasons they were looking for a Messiah. They knew someone was supposed to come and save them, and they were looking for it to happen. Now, if you read the Gospels, you'll recognize that they didn't understand fully who the Messiah was supposed to be. They thought he was going to be a political Messiah. They were not anticipating exactly who Jesus turned out to be. But when we read the Old Testament prophecies, our response should be, well, they should have. Because the Old Testament prophecies are pretty clear about what this Messiah was going to look like. So let's begin by reading the first 3 verses of Isaiah chapter 9. Somebody read that for me.
Nevertheless, the gloom of the distressed land will not be like that of the former times when he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Nephtali. But in the future he will bring honor to the way of the sea, to the land east of the Jordan and the Galilee of the nations. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. You have enlarged the nation and increased its joy. The people have rejoiced before you as they rejoice at harvest time and as they rejoice when dividing spoils.
Okay, so my suspicion is that as you read this, you have no idea what it has to do with the Messiah. Is that the general feeling in here? That what in the world does this have to do with the Messiah? Now, if you read on down and you get to verse 6, you'll be like, oh, okay. But we haven't gotten to verse 6 yet, okay? So I want us to break down what these verses are telling us and what they mean about the Messiah and why Jewish people at that time would have seen these as messianic passages. So remember the context of where we were. We were in Isaiah 7 last week looking at prophecies, and it's the same context we studied last week. So Isaiah is prophesying to an evil king of Judah named Ahaz. He is told God has told him that he will save Judah from annihilation and from invasion by Syria and Israel if they will trust him and ask him for a sign. And so the king Ahaz says, I'm not going to ask for a sign, I'm not going to test God. He refuses to do so, but God says, I'm going to send you a sign anyway. Do y'all remember what the sign was from last week? Come on, somebody recall for me. He said, I will give you a sign, I say this word, y'all are going to know it. A virgin is going to give birth to a baby, okay? And so we talked about all that meant last week, the virgin birth, okay? And then he says he's going to stop the Syrians and the Israelites, but then he says something much worse is coming in their place, the Assyrians. In chapter 8, he lays out what that attack from this Assyrian king and his army is going to look like. So he's telling y'all, guys, it's going to be bad. Things are about to get really bad. The Assyrians are going to come and they're going to destroy everything, and not long after this, the Jewish people are going to be taken into captivity. So I want you to watch what God tells Isaiah is going to happen here, because what he's saying is he begins to lay out a better day that's coming in the future. So the world's about to get real bad for you, is what he's saying, but a better day is coming. And so notice what he says. He uses very poetic language to make this point. Look at verse 1. He begins with a statement. What is that statement in verse 1? There will be no gloom for her who is in anguish. Now, in this context, then who is he talking about is going to be in anguish? We just mentioned it. Yeah, the Jewish people are going to be in anguish because the Assyrians are going to come and they're going to basically wipe them out, okay? But he says there's going to be no gloom for her who is in anguish. He says, in a former time. Now, let me back up for just a moment. As he's speaking poetically about the people of Judah and the people of Israel here, he's speaking, there's a way that the prophets would use language. They would speak in present tense about things that were going to happen in the future. And the reason they would speak in present tense about things that were going to happen in the future is because when God says it, it's just as if it's done already, okay? And so he says, in the former time, he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. Those are just tribes of Judah, tribes of Israel, okay? So he's saying he's brought them into contempt. In other words, the Assyrians are going to destroy everything. They're going to be brought into contempt. But he says, but in the latter times, he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan. The way of the sea is just the part of Israel that is near the Mediterranean Sea. The land beyond the Jordan is the part of Israel that is by the Jordan River. So this is very poetic language. And then he says something else. He calls it Galilee of what? Of the nations. Now, what do you think he means by that, the nations? What does this have to do with what he's saying, do you think? Well, let me ask you this. Is the promise of the Messiah just for the Jewish people? No, he's pointing to something bigger here, okay? So he's saying there's not going to be any gloom for the person who's in anguish. He's saying that God is going to do something big for all this land, but it's not just going to be for the people of Israel, it's going to be for the nations themselves, okay? And so all of these things are going to happen, he says, and so what we're going to see is that this big point is that God has big plans for the future of not just the nation of Israel, but for the world itself. Israel's going to go through this time of anguish, but that time is going to come to an end, and he's going to make it glorious. And this blessing that he is going to give to the people of Israel is going to be more than just for Israel, because he says Galilee of the nations. This blessing is going to expand all over the world, is his point here. This is one of the most important themes that you're going to see in the entire Old Testament. So sometimes, we're in Isaiah 9, sometimes when you read the Old Testament, you will just think it is a story about the Jewish people. And it is a story about the Jewish people, but it's more than that, okay? One of the most important themes you're going to see again and again and again is that God is going to bless the nations through the Jewish people, okay? Somebody quickly look up Psalm 67:4 for me, and then somebody else. Wade, look up Psalm 67:4. Hunter, look up Psalm 96:10. Dalton, look up Psalm 46:10. First one there.
I got it.
What you got? Read it.
Psalm 96:10 says, "Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is firmly established. It cannot be shaken. He judges the peoples fairly."
Say among whom?
The nation.
The nations, okay? You got yours, Wade? Read that.
Let the nations rejoice and shout for joy, and you judge the peoples with fairness and lead the nations on earth. Selah.
Okay, so let whom be glad?
Nations.
The nations be glad. And then Dalton, what does 46:10 say?
Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in all the earth.
What is the common theme throughout those passages there? Who is this for? The nations, okay? And so the Messiah who has come through the Jewish people is not just for the Jewish people. And that's the point when we get back here to Isaiah 9 and he talks about Galilee of the nations, he's saying the same thing. So there's not going to be any gloom for these people in Israel, okay? A latter time is going to be glorious for them, but it's not just going to be for them. It's going to be for everyone, for everyone who will hear this message. God's plan is to use this particular tiny nation for his purposes to redeem the entire world. The Jewish people didn't always get that, and we don't tend to get it either. That's one of the reasons so many people don't like the Old Testament, because we don't think the Old Testament is for us. But they think somehow it's different than the New Testament. And it is different in some ways, but the Old Testament is pointing us to all this stuff that's supposed to happen in the New Testament. And it has this same big theme, God's intentions to save the world. And so that leads us to a big question then. How is he going to do that? How is God going to save the world? Not just how is God going to bring Israel out of their anguish, but how is he going to do something glorious for the nations? Okay? And that's the big question that this text is begging us to ask. And it takes us into verse 2 here, okay? So he begins to explain how this is going to happen. First of all, in verse 2, what does he say? What does he say is the problem with the people?
They're walking in darkness.
Yeah, the people who walked in darkness. What do you think he means by that? What does it mean to walk in darkness?
Sin.
Okay, yeah, he's pointing to their sin, okay? So this is not just the Jewish people who are obviously in darkness, even though they've been shown the truth, had God revealed to them. The reason they're about to be invaded by the Assyrians is because of their rebellion against God, okay? So it's not just the people of Israel, it's everyone who is walking in darkness because of their sin. It's the problem. Everyone, their sin has brought them into darkness. Your sin has brought you into darkness. Our sin prevents us from being able to see the truth of God. We're blinded to the truth. And the reason that we're blinded to the truth is because we don't want to know the truth. That's what Romans 1 tells us, that we intentionally suppress the truth. We should understand the truth, but because of our sin, we don't want to understand the truth. Why does sin prevent you from understanding the truth? Why will your sin prevent you from seeing truth?
Because sometimes the sin you're doing may be enjoyable, and so you don't want to, it's wrong, but you're enjoying the sin, so you don't want to see that there is wrong in it.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't see the truth because we don't want to see the truth.
We get comfortable.
Yeah, we get comfortable. We like our sin. Did y'all know that the only reason anybody ever sins, the only reason you ever sin is because you like it? Why else would you do it? Right? We enjoy our sin, and so we see God's revelation, and we want to ignore that. And so that's what the Bible talks about, walking in darkness. Okay, so sin has put the people in darkness. But what does he say in verse 2? These people who have walked in darkness, what have they done now?
That's a great light.
Yeah, they've seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has the light shone. So the particular darkness that the people of Israel are seeing right here because of their sin, they're dealing with consequences: invasion, attack, destruction, eventually exile. But God is saying, despite that, there's something that good is going to come. Light is going to shine down into darkness. Now, does anybody recognize a common theme, this light and darkness that we see in the New Testament? I'll just tell you. Turn to John 1. Look in John 1 real quick. Somebody read verses 4 through 5 of John 1 for me.
verses?
4 and 5 of John 1.
We are writing these things so that our joy may be complete.
John 1, not
Oh.
1 John 1.
Oh,
John,
1, 4 and 5.
life was in him, and that life was the light of men. That light shines in the darkness, yet the darkness did not overcome him.
Okay, so Isaiah says that the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shone. And then John 1, 4 and 5 says, in him was life, and that life was the light of men. And then he says this is kind of the same thing. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And so Isaiah and John are reflecting the same thing. Now, who is John talking about there in chapter 1? This is an easy one. It's not a trick question. He's talking about Jesus, okay? And so he's saying that what Isaiah was talking about in Isaiah 9 is he was talking about Jesus, okay? So then that tells us about Jesus and what he does for sinful people. What does Jesus do for people who have fallen into sin, who are walking in darkness? What does he say and he does?
brings them to light.
He brings them into the light. He gives them all the light they need. He's the light of the world. He opens our eyes to see the truth about who God is. His light overcomes the darkness that's in our hearts because of our sin. And he says that his light is stronger than our darkness. It overcomes our darkness. If you have been saved, here's what happened to you. This supernatural, miraculous thing happened to you. You were walking in darkness. I want you to think about the sin that you were in before you turned to Jesus. Maybe think about what your life was like previous to knowing Jesus. The things that you did that you know you shouldn't have done, the things that you look back on with regrets, the hurts that you caused to yourself and to other people. You did them because you liked them. But the reason you're here today is because God has shown his light into your darkness, and he has opened your eyes to the truth, and now you want to follow that truth. Now, none of us do it perfectly, but what he is saying is the whole point of what Jesus has done for us is that he has opened our eyes to truth. Okay? And now that your eyes are open, you don't want to go back. You see the hurt and the pain, you see the problems that it caused, and now you don't want to go back, okay? And so I want you to see now in verse 3, what is the reaction of the people to whom this light is going to come?
Rejoicing.
Yeah, he says, you have multiplied the nations, you have increased its joy, they rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest. They are glad when they divide the spoil. So we don't live as much in a farming kind of context anymore, but you can understand why people would be excited at the time of the harvest, right? The food's coming in, right? And so they say you rejoice at the time of harvest. And then he says they're glad is when they divide the spoil. Anybody know what the spoil is? He's kind of switched metaphors on us. He switched from a harvest metaphor to a war metaphor. So at the end of a war, what does the winner do with the loser's stuff? Yeah, he takes it and he splits it up. And so you imagine at the end of a war, you've taken all the money and all the stuff that the losers have, and you're dividing it up amongst you. And he's saying that's the kind of joy that they're going to have. What do you think the point here is? What is he trying to say then? What is this light a cause for? What should our reaction to the light be?
Rejoicing.
Yeah. He's saying this is a cause for joy. The coming of the Messiah. Remember, this is written 500 years before Jesus. Okay? And so Isaiah is saying, I know things are bad right now. And things are going to get worse before they get better. But this is the promise that you have, that one day something is going to happen, the light is going to shine on you, and you're going to see the truth, and not just you are going to be blessed by this, but all the nations of the world are going to be blessed by this in a way that you can all rejoice, because the darkness that you're experiencing right now, the light is going to shine on it. And so this is what Isaiah is talking about and who he is pointing to. He is pointing to Jesus right here. And so when we read this, we recognize this as a prophecy that is pointing us to the Messiah. And so this is a Christmas prophecy. And as we look next week, and we look in verses following verse 6, we're going to see it even more. But this is leading up to that, showing us that the people of Isaiah's time were expecting something. They were expecting a Messiah to come, and Jesus comes and he becomes exactly that, okay? All right, anybody want to add anything to that before we move on to the last two verses I want to look at? Any questions? All right, somebody read verses 4 and 5 for me.
For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping war in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire.
Okay, that is a vivid picture that he's drawing right there, okay? But he's making a really important point about who the Messiah is and what the Messiah is going to ultimately do. So the yoke of his burden, we're talking about Israel and Judah here, okay? He's saying they have a great burden. They're about to be basically destroyed, okay? And they're going to be destroyed by the oppressor, who is going to be the Assyrians and the Babylonians. But what does he say he's going to do to the rod of the oppressor, ultimately?
Broke.
Yeah, he's going to break the rod of the oppressor. So imagine, the picture he's drawing here is of someone who is a slave master or something like that, who beats his slaves, okay? That's the picture that he's drawing right here, the oppressor, and he has a rod, and God is going to break that rod. In other words, no beatings, no more beatings he's going to get, okay? And then he gets even more graphic in then he says, as the day of Midian. Just in case, do y'all know what the day of Midian is? Do y'all remember the story of Gideon in the Old Testament? Okay, so Gideon is the guy who was basically called out of nowhere and did not want to be one of the judges in the Old Testament, but the Midianites kept attacking, and somebody needed to do something. So Gideon stepped up and he led the people in the destruction of the Midianites. So he's comparing what is going to happen when the Messiah comes. It's going to be much like the way that the Midianites were destroyed in the day of Gideon, okay? So it's just an idea of salvation coming to the people here, okay? And then in verse 5, what does he say? He says, every boot of the tramping warrior and battle tumult and every garment rolled in blood, what's going to happen to them?
Burned as fuel for the fire.
Burned as fuel for the fire. That's a very graphic picture here. What is his point, do you think? What is he saying is going to happen there? What's going to happen to all the signs that bad stuff had happened?
It'll be burned.
Yeah, they're going to be burned. So what's the point, do you think? Talking about the boots of the warriors and the rod of the oppressors and the garment that are, it's very graphic, but the battle garments that have been soaked in blood, they're going to be burned. What is his point, do you think? Why would they burn them?
To the day when he come return.
Okay, for his return. Why would they burn all this stuff? Would you burn it if you needed it anymore? Let's put it that way. No, he's talking about he's going to destroy all this stuff because it's not going to be needed anymore. Every vestige of war and evil and sin is going to be gone, and it will not be seen anymore. He's telling us that the coming of the Messiah is going to be an end to war and oppression. It's going to be a time when God is going to set up his kingdom on earth. It's a time when there's finally going to be peace on earth. When we talk about Christmas, that's one of the phrases that you hear over and over again, right? Peace on earth. Let there be peace on earth. So if that's the case, then, that the coming of Jesus is supposed to bring this, why didn't it? Is war? Has war been? Is war destroyed? Have y'all seen the fire yet? No, we've not seen war's end. Is sin gone yet?
Cause that particular day ain't came yet, right?
I'm sorry, say it again.
So that particular day ain't came yet. It's meaning when he comes the second time, though, right?
Man, that's a gold star right there, Hunter. That's what I'm talking about. The only thing is if you could have waited and let the tension build for like 30 more seconds a day. but that's absolutely what he's getting at here, okay? So I want you to remember what we talked about with prophecies last week, okay? Often with Old Testament prophecies, there is a near and a far fulfillment. So the near fulfillment happens almost immediately. We saw that in chapter 7 when he says, unto us a child is born. Well, no, that's chapter 9 when he says that a virgin's going to give birth to a baby, and then that's going to end with the Syrians and Israel being destroyed, but the Assyrians are going to come in. So that's a near fulfillment. But then some of that stuff we read in there had a further fulfillment in Jesus. Now, what you're also going to see in the Old Testament is that some of it has a near fulfillment, some of it has a fulfillment in Jesus' first coming, and some of it has a fulfillment in Jesus' second coming. And so this is pointing us to a time when Jesus is going to return. So in this prophecy, we see this pointing us forward not just to the first coming of Jesus, but pointing us to the second coming of Jesus. The first coming of Jesus inaugurates the kingdom of God. The second coming of Jesus is going to consummate the kingdom of God. So through Jesus' first coming, the light shines in the darkness. People are able to hear and to see truth about who God is and what he's done through Jesus, and they're going to have an opportunity to respond. But a time is coming when Jesus is going to fully consummate his kingdom, and the garments rolled in blood are going to be burned as fuel for the fire. He's going to destroy sin and death and evil. He's going to finally finish it forever. Okay? And he's going to set things right forever. So why didn't he do this the first time?
Because he had to die on the cross first.
Okay, so his death, he needed to suffer for the sins of the world? Yeah, absolutely. Why else did he do it the first time? You ever hear somebody say when they're talking about how could a good God allow all this evil in the world? You ever heard anybody say something like that? Why does God allow that then? Why has God not just stopped it all yet?
Because through Jesus, like being crucified for us, pretty much, right?
Well, that inaugurates it and it brings us to it. But why hasn't he? Why is there still sin in the world right now? If he could stop it.
No one doesn't make our own choice.
Gold star. Come on, bring it on. That's what I'm talking about. He's giving us an opportunity to respond to him now. Jesus' first coming brings truth into the world. It brings light into the world. It shines light into the darkness. And now that people are no longer in darkness and can see the light, they have an opportunity to respond to the light. But when Jesus comes and does this, the opportunities to respond will be over. Okay? When the author walks out on the stage, the play is over. All right? And it's the same thing here. When the author of everything finally walks out here for the final time, the opportunities to respond are done. He's gonna destroy evil completely then, and then there will be no more opportunities to respond. So right now he's shown light down into the darkness, and people can look around and they can see their own sin, and they can see the destruction that sin has caused and see all those problems, and they have an opportunity to respond. Peter says that a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day to Jesus, to God, and the reason that he's not destroyed everything already is because he's patient with people, not wanting anyone to perish. And so the difference between verses 1 through 3 and verses 4 and 5 is there is an opportunity now for everyone to respond. So in this passage, we see the first coming of Jesus and we see the second coming of Jesus. And what ought this do what ought our attitude about the second coming of Jesus be when we read this then?
It's going to be a bad day for some people.
It's going to be a bad day for some people. So what should our attitude toward those people who are in danger be?
Try to save them, help save them.
Yeah, we ought to be taking the message of the gospel to as we go back to verse 1, the nations. Every nation should be blessed through this. So this ought to be a motivation for us to do missions, that this is what's going to happen. God is going to finally set things right forever. And so it ought to be our motivation to take this message to people. So we ought to be motivated. That ought to be one reaction. Remember what we talked about at the beginning, like how you felt as a kid about Christmas, that anticipation? We ought to feel anticipation about this, because this is what you want whether you realize it or not. This is what everyone really wants whether they realize it or not. I mean, think about the trouble in the world and the problems and all the crap that you deal with on a daily basis. The solution is Jesus coming back and setting everything right. Okay, and that's the promise here, that he's going to do that. Okay, the anticipation that you feel about the coming of Christmas ought to be an anticipation about the second coming of Jesus in some sense, because let's be honest, Christmas never fully delivers. No matter how exciting it is, it ends at some point, and you're left with paper strewn on the floor and the deep desire to take a nap. It never fully delivers. And the reason it never fully delivers is because it can't fully deliver until Jesus finally returns, okay? But at his second coming, he's going to finally satisfy fully and completely. That is the promise of this. And so this is the big picture that I want you to see this morning. Through Isaiah, God is promising that he has big plans, not just for the nation of Israel, but for the whole world. Those plans involve overcoming darkness that has overcome the world, overcoming the sin that has come over the world, shining light into the darkness. It is a reason for joy and celebration. But for those who choose the darkness, it will lead to destruction. And so it ought to motivate us to get the gospel to every person who needs to hear it, to do what we have to do to get them to see the truth and to see the light. Because Jesus is ultimately the judge of every single human being, and his judgment is going to be based on what they did with the light that they were given. Okay? Right. Any questions? Anybody want to add anything to that? Okay, Wade, why don't you close this in prayer?
Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you so much for all you've done. Thank you for a great listening to you, Lord. Please be with us all throughout the week and everything. In your most precious name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right.